Okay, so I have the recording going. I think most of our panel is here. Okay. Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our virtual post-match panel. Bear with me. I am not very good at WebEx. So the way that we're going to keep this relatively organized is that you can put your questions in the chat box, and then whichever fourth year, if you feel like you have an answer to it or want to say something, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and give whatever advice you have. You can go ahead and start putting things in the chat. If no one has questions, I have a whole list because I'm applying this year too. Let's see. Oh, and then we also have Jack Wood here. He's at UNC. He was our RIG president previously before Logan. So Jack. All right, fourth years, do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves and let everyone know where you're going for intern year and for radiology, if you're doing IR or DR, whatever that is. You can start with Caroline.
Okay, so I'm Caroline Hubbard. So I am doing couples match. So if anybody's couples matching, I'm happy to help. You can always text me or anything. So I'm doing my intern year in internal medicine at UVA, and then I'm also doing diagnostic radiology at UVA as well. So I'll be up there for the next 5 years.
Cool. All right. Who else is on here? Logan.
So I'm Logan. I am doing my intern year at Myrtle Beach next year, and I'm doing DR at Northwestern.
Ooh.
Cool. Let's see down here. All right, Baxter.
So I'm Baxter. I will be doing my intern year in surgery at MUSC, and then I'll be doing IR up at UNC, joining Jack.
Cool. So you broke up a little bit there. Where are you going for intern year?
Oh, so intern year will be a surgery year here at MUSC.
Cool. Nice. We'll see you around.
Yep, I'll be around one more year.
All right. Nice. Let's see. I think I saw Gibson. I think you're on there.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm doing my TY out in Salt Lake City at Intermountain Medical Center, and then headed to Wake Forest.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Who else? Seth.
What's up, everybody? I'm Seth. I'm doing intern year in Charlotte at Atrium Health, and then DR back here at MUSC.
Let's see. Is Hugh or Kelly here? I missed anybody?
I think Hubert just got on.
Here.
Hey there.
Do you think just hear who's talking and then you switch? I haven't used WebEx.
Introduce yourself, Hugh.
Introduce myself?
Yeah. Where are you going for intern year and after?
I'm going to Georgetown for IR with a built-in surgery intern year.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Anyone, and I'm Alexis, by the way, because I'm sending y'all tons of emails. I'm president for next year. So if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat box. I had a couple questions too, just sort of generally to start application process and things. How many programs did y'all apply to, and how to decide about where to go, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that greatly also depends on if you're doing IR or DR. I'll let Baxter and Hugh talk to IR and Caroline for couples matching. But for DR, I mean, the norm is around 40 places that you apply to. And you want to try to go at least on 12 to 15-ish interviews. I recommend all of you guys to meet Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gordon if she's still there. I know she's talking about retiring, so I don't know if she'll be there next year. But those two will be very good help as far as what programs to apply to and how many and all that.
Yeah,
sorry, Caroline.
They're really good. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Logan said, like they're really good if there's like a particular region that you're interested in, you can just kind of go online and search by state what programs, or in states maybe you're interested in living or applying to, and you can bring that list to them, and they'll kind of go through it with you, like knowing some stuff about your application, about like where to apply, what would be a good option, but, so that was super helpful.
Was anything different for IR?
A little more on the IR side. I know Hugh will probably agree. We applied to at least, so Hugh and I each probably applied to a total of like 100 programs. And so some of those count as 2 for the same school. So like 2 for MUSC, 1 to their IR, 1 to their DR. Just to kind of make sure you cover your bases. The IR group here, Dr. Yamada he's relatively helpful. I wouldn't say he's quite as helpful as some of the DR faculty you mentioned. Dr. Lewis is really good. Even if you're going into IR, she's super helpful and knows a ton of people and is a really good kind of just source of information for interviews and how to reach out to programs and all that stuff. I'd probably lean more towards reaching out to her with specific questions about interviews and stuff rather than Dr. Yamada. He's not quite as helpful on that standpoint, but he does know a lot of people within the IR community if you're trying to potentially get him to reach out and maybe get you an interview or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically like meeting with them, and they can look over your application and they can give you more guidance about like specifically how many numbers of programs you should apply to depending on what your application looks like. For Dr. Lewis told me, like, if you're applying to IR to the program, also apply to DR, because most programs, there's no hostility between the two. But I feel like that might change, like, going forward, I guess, as they, break off a little bit more. But I would just meet with them and see what they have to say specific to you. But yeah, I mean, basically what Baxter said, I ended up applying to, like, a ton of places. I probably over-applied, but it is what it is.
And so Dr. Lewis will tell you for the IR applicants, at MUSC, if you only apply to IR, they won't give you an interview because they want you to also be interested and invested in the diagnostic side of the training. So if you want to go to a place, I would suggest applying to both, because I don't know, I'm sure there are other programs that do the same thing, where if you only apply to IR, they won't give you an interview because they feel like you're not fully invested in the diagnostic side as well. So apply to both if you want to do IR.
Yeah, I think I applied to both for every program. I mean, it's expensive, but it's worth it.
Speaking of expensive, about how much money do y'all suggest saving for interview season, applications, travel, all the above?
I am not going to contribute to this part just because with the couples match, it's a whole different ball game. Obviously, if somebody couples match, please pipe up, but I'm going to defer that kind of stuff to the other fourth year people.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's kind of personal preference. So if you are very region specific, you're probably not going to spend as much because you can drive to a lot of your interviews. But like, I had no preference on region, so I flew to 90% of mine. So mine racked up, I think close to $10,000 when it was all said and done. But if you drive, I mean, you're going to cut that price in half because flights are really the most expensive thing. So if you are going to apply broadly, and I know Gibson applied broadly as well, in addition to the IR people, like I'm sure we spent a good amount more money than what you necessarily had to if you really were set on the Southeast.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally for people who are applying all over the country and flying everywhere, they recommend around $10,000, which is probably what I spent.
Just on applications alone, if you apply to, so right at 100 programs free, I think was like, I want to say like $1,300, $1,400, something like that, just for the application fees alone.
I think I would say that for DR, I think 10,000 is a little on the high side. But like I drove to like Nashville and drove to UVA and places like that like some people probably flew to just because they didn't want to spend like 8 hours in the car. It's also, it just is kind of variable how much you can link your interviews together. Like I flew out to California and did 3 in a week out there. So that saved me money. Like I wasn't flying across the country multiple times.
Okay, we have a couple questions in the chat. So Nathan asked, the people who did aways, when did you start saving for them? Because you try to return excess loans, and what's like about how much does an away rotation cost, and what's up with the third grant? I don't know what that is. But.
If you can, try to find somebody who is doing an away here, and they can rent your room while you're gone. That helps a lot because then you're not paying rent in 2 places. And then most places is actually the fees for the school are actually pretty cheap and aren't too bad. I'd say the main thing is like a lot of them have like a $200, $250 like application fee or something like that. It's non-refundable. And then other than that, the big thing is living expenses. So if you can find somebody, there's a rotating room, which is a big thing that all like 3rd year or 4th year medical students really use to try to find housing. And you can post your room on there, and it's guaranteed. Well, I mean, pretty much guaranteed to be a medical student. I don't know of any people who aren't in medical school using that website. And then, I mean, you know they're going to take care of it, and you can just kind of offset your costs. So it actually doesn't end up being significantly more expensive than if you were here, I found personally.
Yeah, I mean, I did rotating room and rent out my room for a month when I was one of my ways, and the other one I was staying with a friend up in DC. So, I mean, I definitely have to pay double rent for 1 month, which definitely helps. So if you like are applying in a place where you know people or something like that, the rotating room is pretty reliable. I think it's only med students can have it because you have to have a medical school email to get on it.
All right. The next question is from Emily. She said, when did you know for sure that you wanted to do IR or DR? And do you have any advice for first and second years and like what you should be doing to make sure this is the specialty that you want to go into?
Just get involved. I mean, that's the big thing. Radiology, if you do a rotation, it's not really going to give you insight just because you're sitting there and watching someone else. So the best thing you can do is get involved, try, you know, if you can do research and that sort of thing, and really just try to envision being the radiologist, because it's not like when you're doing internal medicine and you can do the exam yourself and you can, you know, write notes. You're not going to be able to do any of that as a medical student. As far as IR or DR, I mean, even talking to residents now, some of them still don't know. The beauty of where we are today is they have what they call the ESIR program. And so, you know, people matching into DR still will have availability to go into IR. But in my opinion, it's really just getting exposed as much as possible, since it's not really a place in medical school that has built-in exposure. And also, Seth, do you want to chime in since you came to the game like really late? Like, what kind of was the tipping point for you?
Yeah. So I kind of figured out I wanted to do radiology like November 1st of interviewing cycle, and then canceled all my interviews for the other specialty I was going into. I kind of sat in the reading room, and I just kind of had fun like trying to figure out what was going on the X-rays or what's going on the CT scan myself, instead of kind of sitting there like just wasting time. Like try to look, like ask a few questions here and there. If you see something that you think is interesting, like make it interesting for yourself. Like I mean, kind of like what Logan says. Imagine like being the radiologist. That was kind of what got me interested. It was just more fun than being on a floor for me. So that was kind of what pushed me over.
Yeah, I think it's hard to like really understand what being a radiologist is like when you're in medical school. So like the DR rotations, like you're saying, aren't like that helpful. But obviously, as far as IR, like all the staff and faculty are super friendly and helpful, and they'll let you shadow whenever you want. So that would be one way to at least see if you're interested in that side of things.
Yeah, and like Logan was saying, getting involved is really great. We still need a secretary for RIG for next year. So if you're interested, you can apply. Next question is from Dominic. He said, what were some of your favorite interview day questions? And then I was going to ask sort of like piggyback off that, sort of what are some of the most common questions that they ask you at like every program? And then what were some weird ones that you weren't expecting to?
Have like a short little 1-ish minute blurb, but just tell me about yourself. Because it doesn't matter if you're doing radiology or your prelim interviews. That's always the sort of open up. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Pick a direction you want to go in, whether it's you want to sort of highlight your research you did or, where you went to undergrad or what have you. Just kind of have that down pat and know why you did radiology. Because those two are pretty universal across the board. So if you already have them prepared in your back pocket, I mean, you can just get them out of the way and you're not fumbling, and you can open up some time for, more directed questions.
Yeah, they ask about your hobbies a lot, so be ready to talk about that, especially in radiology. They just want to see that they can spend time with you, and so be ready. Like anything that you have on your application, especially in the hobby section, is going to come up at some point. So be ready to talk about those. And like if you did any research or something, sometimes that will come up and they'll be like, oh, tell me about what you did, with whatever project, or tell me about like if you were involved in something on campus. It's kind of similar to the hobbies. Like they'll ask you like, oh, tell me a little bit like what you did in this role. Those were kind of like the most common stuff that I felt like I got.
Yeah, I think I like Googled the top 10 most common interview questions, like strengths and weaknesses and all that, and kind of didn't like write it out, but like had a like idea of what I'll talk about during those questions. And so that helps. You don't want to like, type out an exact answer and sound like a robot or anything, but doing that like, a couple weeks before, try to get your mind ready for those questions helped me a lot. And obviously like why that program specifically, why that city, and any ties you have or anything like that. They're going to ask that usually. Especially
if you go out of region, just piggybacking off of you, Hugh. If you go out of region, you better be able to explain to them why you're willing to go out there, which I know makes no sense. You paid the money to apply there. You pay for the, airline ticket and the hotel. So obviously you want to go there, but like they will get brought up. So make sure you are prepared if you're going somewhere, like why specifically that program, that city. And don't just say, well, you're ranked highly on Doximity, so I wanted to apply here.
Anytime I went out a region like in the Northeast or like the Southwest, they always would ask, like when I was sitting there for interview day, oh, why did you decide to like come out here and interview? Like you're from South Carolina, like why are you here basically? So definitely be like ready for that one if you're going somewhere like out of region.
All right. There's no more questions in the chat right now. Do you guys want to just sort of walk through like an overview of interview day, sort of like what goes down at like the dinner before and sort of what to expect during the interview process?
I would say, I mean, be personable. I mean, that's the big thing. You're going to get tired and wore out because, unfortunately, since you also have to do intern year, like interviews, you know, there's going to be weeks where you're doing 3 to 4 interviews in a week. Like, you're going to be wore out. But just remember, like, you always want to put your best foot forward. So always be personable. Make it to the dinner unless you 100% can't because of some sort of scheduling conflict. Like, always try to make it to the dinner and just be ready to talk. And if you do the research on the program the night before, you know, you have your dinner or during the day before your dinner, you'll have some good questions because the websites are usually pretty good. There will always be something specific to you that you want answered. And the further you go along during interview season, you'll start to pick up on things that you find really important. So as the interview season goes on, it's a lot easier to ask more direct questions just because you've heard from these other programs and you know exactly what you're looking for.
The dinner is also a really good chance to ask questions that you wouldn't want to really ask in front of like faculty at that place. The residents are really honest, and if you have any questions that are more like kind of social life or things like that, that's a good place to ask them, and the residents will give you honest answers. So that's another good reason to attend those.
Yeah, the dinners are super helpful. There were a couple of times like I couldn't go to the dinner just because of like flights or something like that. And I always like when I left, it was really hard to like, I don't know, get a good idea of the residents when you don't have the dinner with them, even though it's like maybe an hour or two. Just like even getting to there and ask like, what are some of the things you like to do in this area? Like kind of gives you an idea of like what residents do outside of work. Do they hang out with each other? Like are there fun things to do in the region? And then like on the interview day, obviously, like if you have to miss a dinner, I would always just ask some extra questions like on the tour, or like during lunch or something like that, you know, when I was one-on-one with the residents again. So, I mean, it's not like the end of the world if you can't make it, but definitely try because you know, you get a much better feel for the program for sure.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Nathan asks, what's the logic in choosing a transition year, surgery versus IM versus transition year? Like, how do you decide which one to do for intern?
Well, at least on the DR side of things, like programs do not care what you do. So first and foremost, it's probably location. Like for instance, I know Caroline couples matching, like since I guess still fiance. Since wedding got pushed back. But since he's going to be starting right away at UVA, it's more important for her to do internal medicine at UVA than try to do a TY like here in South Carolina. But if it's not really a location thing, TYs 100% are the easiest things usually across the board. Surgery, just think about when you do a surgery rotation as a third year, think about what the interns are doing, and the same with internal medicine, because that's what you're going to be doing. It's just that most people choose TY if they can, just for the simple fact that it's like a glorified fourth year where you're rotating through like the ED and you can do peds, you can do internal medicine. Like you just have a little bit more flexibility and more time off when you do a TY year.
I will say one thing. So you do have to apply to them separate. And one thing that maybe I got some advice from Dr. Heinzelman when I was applying because the radiology tended to send out their interviews earlier than like intern year programs were starting. And so I was kind of kind of caught in the middle, like, okay, like, am I going to have to go back if I want to have an intern year option at this particular like location? And so I talked to him about when would be an appropriate time to maybe start emailing some of these intern year programs like, hey, I have an interview with radiology on this date. You know, do you have is it at all possible to interview with y'all kind of around that area? And a lot of times I actually interviewed with like internal medicine programs, like I would meet with the chief or something after my radiology interview. A lot of them were super accommodating, like while you were there. So, you know, I would talk to like, if you have somebody you're comfortable with in internal medicine, like for this application cycle, asking like when would be an appropriate date to like kind of start emailing and asking about that, because that can also save you some money if you obviously aren't having to like travel back. And then some of the programs will do like Skype and video interviews, especially in like January periods of time. And maybe with all this COVID stuff, more of that may happen more and more. So those are also, you can kind of calculate that in too with your finances with having to apply to both separately.
Yeah. You guys want to touch on like kind of what they want from the IR perspective?
Yeah, so if you ask any program in the country for IR, they're going to tell you to do a surgical year. But then if you ask them what they did, they're going to all say they did a TY. So it's not going to kill you to apply to both. It all kind of depends. I only applied to surgery at the beginning because I was, worried if I didn't match an IR, I'd match in a DR. And if you're trying to do the ESIR route, you're going to want to set yourself out from the rest of your classmates or your residency class. And one of the ways you can do that is showing you're more dedicated by only doing surgical intern, which I think was Baxter's approach. But after finding out that like every interventional radiologist practicing right now did a TY, I ended up applying just like 10 TYs, like very small amount, like the smallest amount possible. Because I found out a lot of the programs are still advanced, meaning you can still do a TY and also match in the IR, which I was kind of hoping for. But Georgetown and MUSC and a lot of places are switching to where it's all built in and the surgery year is part of the whole entire residency. So in that case, it didn't really matter. And I wanted to go to Georgetown, so that was worth it than, trying to do a TY and match advanced.
Yeah, from my experience, most of the programs I interviewed with highly suggested that they wanted you to do surgical year just to kind of get the experience of managing surgical patients. They tend to be a little closer to kind of the patients you see in IR. And then, as Hugh mentioned, some programs are categorical, meaning that they have the intern year built in. I'd say it's about maybe half and half. And for example, so I'll be up at UNC doing IR, and it's actually not categorical. So they had there's 4 other guys from UNC who will be in my residency class for radiology up there, and so they actually all ended up doing surgery at UNC. So I actually put UNC surgery ahead of MUSC surgery, but it just that's the way it shook out. And so I would make sure you put multiple places when you end up ranking, put multiple places for your intern year. Like, don't think, I'll easily get an intern year here, like at the place you're applying. Make sure you still cover all that to make sure you match. But then also just kind of ask and say, do y'all really care where I do it? Because most places, as Hugh said, they'll say it and then they'll say, actually, it's really not the end of the world, whatever is easiest for you, like moving wise and stuff like that.
If you're one of those people who's like on the fence between IR and DR, you just decide to go like apply DR, hoping to do ESIR. I mean, I think at that point it might be beneficial to do a surgery year, just as I was saying before, because the program directors definitely look highly on that. And especially if you do a surgery year at the same place you're going to do radiology, that ends up being really good because radiologists are on the phone with the surgeons all the time. So if you know the system and you know the surgeons better, then that's going to help you going forward.
Right. Next question. Dominic asked, what resources would you recommend for learning about different programs?
Word of mouth is probably like the biggest thing. I think between all of us, we probably applied and interviewed at the majority of places that you guys are also going to apply and interview at. Look at their website. I mean, you can check Doximity. You can check, what is that, like the Avatar MD, which is radiology's like big spreadsheet for interviews. But really, it's all personal preference. So, anytime I got an interview somewhere, I would ask people, like before I go, if I knew someone that also interviewed there, we had a group sort of chat we would talk to, like, hey, what did you think of this place and how was this place? So I think just knowing your class when you are doing interview season and having all of like numbers where you can reach out, it's probably the most beneficial because you're going to apply very broadly. So it really comes down to like choosing interviews themselves.
Yeah, and just the same people we mentioned before, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Gordon, any of the IR people can be really helpful as well.
Cool. All right, Charlie, I think I sort of answered your question about intern year, so we should be good there. Emily asked, how did you decide what program was your number one?
You'll just get like kind of a gut feeling. You'll be back and forth. Some people know it right away. Some people know it later. It's hard to say. You'll just kind of get a feeling. And then when you're forced to put the matches into a computer, your brain somehow sorts out which one it likes the most.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Logan.
Okay, no, you go ahead, Caroline.
Dr. Bourne, I think she told us this in our like pre-match, like before we had to put in our rank list. It was like this seminar, and it was actually a really good advice. She said she had told a student like years past the student was really struggling with what to put one, and she suggested to them like put her top few that she was like deciding between into a bag and pretend it was like match day and she was opening a letter and like gauge her reaction to opening that program. And that actually, like, I didn't use that necessarily for like deciding on my number one or anything, but like for, you know, some of the ones like say 6, 7, 8, whatever, I actually kind of thought about that and it was really helpful. It's kind of like what Baxter was saying, like when you go to make the rank list, your brain kind of will push you in one direction subconsciously, even if you think you have the same opinion about programs. So doing something like that can be super helpful. And then just kind of, as Logan said earlier, on the interview like trail, you're going to figure out what things are really important to you and whether, you know, you'll be able to differentiate like what programs have those features that you're really looking for. I mean, I kept pretty detailed notes like as I was interviewing, and that was like one of the best things I did, because when I went back to start making my rank list, I could reference like, oh, did this program have this feature or whatever, because it all starts to runs together a lot.
And a lot of it is intangibles, because every place pretty much is going to tell you we have the greatest PAC system. You know, we have, you know, we do this many IR procedures, whether you go into, in case you didn't know, if you go into DR, you still have to do an IR rotation, so they'll still talk to you about it. You know, so all the places are going to have sort of the standard things, but you just, figure out what's important. Like I knew I wanted to be in a big city. So, you know, my top choices were all in big cities. So it's just really finding what it is that matters to you as an individual. And that's why it's so important to go to dinners, in my opinion, is because, you know, the program's one thing, but especially programs that allow first-year residents to come to the dinners, well, they're going to be, you know, third years when you're starting. So they'll at least be there for 2 years with you. So are these people you can actually get along with and, you know, go grab a beer after a shift, or can you be on call with this person? So really look for intangibles. I think that really sort of determines number one. It's not necessarily like what they have on their website or what packs they use. It's just, are you friends with, can you be friends with these people? Is it in a location that you like, that sort of thing?
Yeah, also just some of the best advice that someone told me on the interview trail was, you know, everyone's obsessed with their top 3 and what they're going to put as their top 3, but like your list continues after that. And, you know, some people I've heard are like devastated, you know, when they imagine their 6th place and they're like, oh, I should have put this one. I put 8th and ahead of that one. So just take every single rank seriously and don't just blow it off like, oh, I'm definitely going to match in my top 3, even if you are, you know, like one of the top candidates. You know, if you're interviewing at some of the top programs, nothing's guaranteed, and don't trust anything that any program director necessarily tells you.
Yeah, I will also say that I think a lot of people, there's kind of like this rhetoric around like you'll know, or like you'll like have these like couple programs that you absolutely love. And I would just say, like, from my experience, I didn't really have that much, But in some ways, that's kind of good because, I mean, ideally, you'll kind of wind up with a lot of places clustered at the top that you feel like you would be happy at. And it kind of makes it hard to make that exact order. But I feel like that'll at least help you sort of avoid what Hugh's talking about, where you wind up somewhere and then like you wish you weren't there.
Do you tell the programs that they're your number one or in your top three? I know we talked about this last year, but I can't remember.
So number one, I told both my TY and the place for radiology they were number one. And then it's up to you how far down the list you go as far as sending emails. Dr. Gordon says send them to your top 10. You know, other people say send them to your top 3. It's really up to you. I think I sent it to my top 4 because, like Gibson said, I kind of grouped mine into tiers rather than per se like 1, 2, 3, 4, just sort of tiers. And you tell them, you know, you're at the top of my list. If they're not one, I wouldn't give them a specific number or anything like that. But, you know, you can always reach out. I don't think it's going to hurt. It's probably not going to help because they're going to have their list in probably way before you actually send out those emails and you know. But it's not going to hurt as long as you're professional in what you're saying.
I think that also varies a lot by the programs. Some programs will reach out and tell you hey, you're ranked to match or something like that. And that's pretty rare actually. So don't be surprised if you don't get communication like that. It also helps, some of the program directors will be very transparent about that. They'll tell you, you know, expect to hear from us, or some places will say, we're not going to email people, so don't expect it. We hope we rank you highly, but we're not going to play games or anything like that.
Yeah, and a lot of places just won't, their policy is they won't respond to anything you say. So even if you send thank you emails, I told Georgetown that they were number one and they never responded. So don't take it to heart or anything.
Also, just to reiterate something that was said earlier, don't believe them because places will tell you that you're ranked to match and sometimes you aren't. That does happen.
Yeah, you hear about it every year.
And whatever you do, do not tell a program they're number one if they're not. Because odds are, you know, they'll be number 2 on your list, but you will match to your number 1. And you know, not saying that they're going to remember that, but if you try to, you know, apply for a fellowship, if that PD is still there, they're like, wait, wasn't that the same person that told us we were number 1 and we ranked him to match and he didn't end up here? You know, so that kind of stuff follows you. That just speaks on really that professionalism aspect again. Don't lie. Programs may lie to you, but just keep yourself in the clear and be truthful.
Cool. Thanks, y'all. Any other questions here in the chat? Anyone wants to put anything? I guess the next question I sort of had was just what would you do differently if you could just rewind and go back to third year, where we are now? What would you do differently?
Don't be afraid to turn down interviews if in hindsight you don't want to go to them. I ended up going on too many because I was just scared to cancel. And it got to be expensive, and there are places that honestly, I would be happy to match there rather than nowhere. But at the same time, I definitely would have not been happy at all if I matched there. So if it's a place when you really think about it, it's not a place that you can see yourself going, don't be afraid to cancel. Just make sure you do it early so that someone can have your spot. Because it happens all the time. Most of the time, the program directors don't even know who canceled. It's just the coordinators, and they don't specifically give names. So you're not burning any bridges. Just make sure you do it early. Because if you're scheduled, you got to show up. So just don't be afraid to cancel it.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. I definitely went on too many interviews and spent too much money, and looking back on it, some of them I wasn't really serious about wanting to go there, so it was kind of stupid to waste that money in that time period. I mean, it's hard to say when especially at the beginning, if you don't know how many interviews you're going to get and stuff like that. But that's probably what I would do differently, is actually think about how serious I wanted to go there before I went to the interview.
Yeah, definitely early on, schedule ones that you get, even if you don't think long term you might go there, just because you never know how many you'll end up with, like you said. And if you get one early that you think, well, I mean, I go here, just schedule it for later. And once others start to come in and you start to feel a little more reassured, you can cancel them. And there's no hard feelings at all. They totally understand that you are limited in money, limited in time, and they just want to hear from you so they can fill your spot with somebody else, because there's always somebody who is dying to get an interview at a place, and you might be the person that cancels and lets them in, and that's their like dream school. So make sure you let them know.
And the one caveat I have to that is if it's a place you're not really serious about, but you get an interview from them early, definitely schedule at least one interview at a place like that. That would be really, quote unquote, sort of a fallback option that you have in your mind, because it's one thing to do the practice questions and to really kind of understand, what your answers would be based on these, but it's another thing to actually be in the situation where you're getting asked these questions. So it's always good to have like one practice interview, so to speak, at the beginning.
I 100% agree with that. I was going to say, also, I mean, I gotten this advice from the people that were in the class ahead of us. Like, if there's some programs that you already know in your head, this is really I think would be a good fit or whatever, kind of schedule them in the middle of interview season. Don't have them strict, your first couple interviews, get one or two out of the way. But likewise, you don't really want to have it your very last interview if possible. Sometimes programs interview super late, and that's totally fine. It's just sometimes if you're coming off of a bunch of interviews, it can be really tiring. And so you want to be able to, if it's a program you're super, super interested in, be able to put in, your best foot forward. But
I think it's also good to schedule your MUSC interview really early if you can, just because they will probably already, they'll be a little bit more forgiving. You're probably not going to get that many hard questions from people that already know you. So.
And speaking on that, make sure that Angie McGuire, especially if you're a third year, knows that you are going into radiology, because she'll reach out to you guys probably, I think it's, I don't know, August maybe, around August. You guys will do a practice interview. They'll set up a little thing where you actually do 3 interviews, and it's very helpful. So make sure that Angie has your name if you're interested in radiology, so that you don't miss out on that, because I think it was a really helpful thing to kind of do before you start your interviews.
Okay. Next question, Nathan asked, how does ESIR work?
So ESIR basically stands for Early Specialization in IR. And basically you match into DR, and depending on their volume at that program, they could have only one spot for ESIR, or they could have enough for whoever wants to do it. And basically what happens is after your second year or 2 year, they'll select people to do an early integrated route, so you get to do more IR rotations within your DR years, and then basically what that does for you is then you can apply to a 1-year fellowship and finish everything in 6 years. Whereas if you don't do ESIR and you do full DR, then you're not going to have enough IR rotations to do a 1-year fellowship, and you have to do the 2-year fellowship, what's called independent pathway. It's kind of confusing, but if you go on SIR's website, they have good explanation of everything.
Jack, can you speak to that a little bit?
All right.
Are you planning on doing ESIR?
Hey, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, ESIR works a little differently compared to some other things. Um, you come into a diagnostic residency. You spend your intern year like any other radiology resident. You start your R1 year. You do mostly DR stuff. You do a month or two of IR depending on your program. You do that same thing for your first 3 years of radiology. Then between your third and fourth years of radiology, so PGY4 to PGY5 year, you apply for ESIR within your program, which means during your PGY5 year, your last year of radiology residency, you do some extra IR rotations, and that includes, some actual IR, like in the angio suites doing procedures. You do some vascular surgery rotations. You do an ICU rotation. And then you have a couple mandatory diagnostic radiology rotations that you have to meet your requirements to so you can be double board certified. And then once you finish your PGY5 year, then you have that early specialization certificate so you can apply for an interventional radiology residency program, but you can forego 1 year of that. So it basically ends up being like a fellowship year where you do 1 year of full IR all the time, and you finish that after 6 years. So it's the same length of time as an integrated residency, 6 years after med school, but you just have to do that extra step to apply for the ESIR pathway during your diagnostic residency.
All right. The next question is from Dante. He said, do you feel that a certain personality type ends up in radiology, or is there more of a spectrum?
I would say personality types fluctuate by programs. So not radiology specific, but as I said before, it's kind of those intangibles that cause you to want to match somewhere and same the program wanting you to match. There's pretty similar personalities within a program, but every program's different. I think it was Baxter who mentioned there's a program where, it was a bunch of like jocks everywhere, and there's programs where it's sort of that type A, sort of nerdy personality that you would think of. So it really all just fluctuates program to program.
Okay. Any tips for getting letters of recommendation? I know it's a little bit tough in radiology. You're not working one-on-one with everybody, sort of. What are some advice y'all have?
I think for the most part, the department, they understand that, radiology is kind of different from other third-year specialties. Like if you did get to do a rotation in it, you only did it for 2 weeks. So I think most people end up asking someone who they either did research with or one of their advisors that you got connected with careers in medicine. And then a lot of times, if you do radiology rotations, at the very beginning of your 4th year, I don't know how things will be affected with y'all's rotations with COVID and Step 2 and all that kind of stuff. But if y'all happen to do one early, you can certainly, try to ask someone that you've worked with. Sometimes they'll want to, have you come by and talk to them a little bit more so they can get to know you, or come sit with them in the reading room, in an afternoon or something. But for the most part, everyone was super understanding. And try to help you out.
And to talk on that with Caroline, if you need one more letter, the first radiology rotation you should do should be a subspecialty specific, because if you do diagnostic, you rotate through 1 a week pretty much, and the attendings are also rotating during that time. But if you do a subspecialty specific, you'll get a lot more one-on-one time with an attending for an entire month. And to be fair, if you can spend nearly an entire month with someone, that's just as good being there intermittently for the past 2 or 3 years, because you're there for a day or you're there for 2 days. So if you're struggling with that last one, be sure to do a subspecialty rotation first, just so you can get that one-on-one time with an attending.
You also, I'm not even sure what Dr. Lewis's official recommendation is, but if you're doing DR, you really only need 1 radiology letter. I applied with 1 radiology letter from a rotation that I did in August, and it was totally fine. Most people understand that a lot of people switch into radiology pretty late, and pretty much everyone also understands that a DR rotation as a medical student is mostly shadowing. So it's not really like a medicine rotation or something where you can show like how dedicated you are, like how well you know like the specific stuff, because no one really knows anything at that stage. So it's really actually, it's pretty good, like especially from core rotations like your gen surg rotation or like internal medicine. If you can get really good letters from that, that helps a lot for radiology.
And
the algorithm that Dr. Lewis gave me was for IR specifically was one DR, one IR. Obviously, you're going to want Dr. Yamada, the program director here. And then she said your surgery rotation is helpful because it's a procedural field. And me and Baxter both happen to do vascular surgery, and there's so much crossover between the two fields that's going to help a lot as well. But yeah, you at least want one DR, one IR, and then vascular surgery, and then you can also get, you know, 2 IR, get one from an away early in the year, kind of like people do for surgery rotations.
yeah, we'll say if you have one program specifically that you're trying to go to, especially if it's out of region, whether it's DR or IR, if you can get a letter from one of the physicians there, it really boosts your chance of actually matching there after doing an away, because it shows like, you know, you did well enough where this doctor felt he could write a good letter of recommendation for you. And also, if you want to do a TY year, a good internal medicine or family medicine letter is also very beneficial to have in your back pocket, because you can kind of adjust what you want to send to different programs. So like TY specifically, I know they really like internal medicine and family med because you kind of do both of those when you're doing that rotation. So keep that in mind too about your prelim years.
Yeah, and then for prelim years, I applied to TY, surgery, and internal medicine. So for surgery, Dr. Balika, he will, like, the surgery department, at least for us, sent out an email, like, I think it was like last summer or something, like, oh, you're going to be applying for, like, a surgery intern year to get, like, you can get a department chair letter from surgery, and so you like go and meet with him for, I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes, and he wrote a letter, and that's what I used when I applied to surgery. And likewise, medicine does the same thing. They do like a chair letter, and so you can use that in addition to like the, you know, internal medicine letters you have when you apply.
I would, if you're doing IR though, I would suggest getting a letter from somebody other than, while they will do the one for Dr. Maliga, do it, and you don't have to use every letter that gets written for every application. But I would also highly suggest you do somebody other than Dr. Maliga, because he writes a very generic letter. And most places know that chairs don't write very personal letters for people. And so you can get a much more personal letter from somebody that you actually were on a surgery rotation with, and that'll carry a lot more weight than Dr. Maliga's letter will. And then
yeah, I only used my Dr. Baliga letter for my intern years. I didn't even send it to any IR places. You're going to want whoever you did your rotation with and knows you better to write that one.
Right.
Yeah, I only used his for like a couple like intern year surgery programs. But
all right. I think probably our last question is, does the type of research you're doing matter as much? Maybe we'll take one or two after this just in case. But type of research you're doing.
It does not. The big thing is you do want research, because the sort of rule of thumb is on ERAS, you don't want anything left blank. So you want to put something in research, and this is for DR specifically. IR's more competitive, so if you or Baxter have better ideas for their research, I'll let them talk about it. But for DR, it's more that you just have something, but keep in mind if you do radiology research, the odds of being able to talk about that with the radiologist doing the interview are higher, specifically if they're in that field. But any research really is good. And I want to touch on, I think we missed one question here about like the program time for research. And absolutely, since we're on the topic of research, every program, well, with ACGME accredited programs, you have to do some sort of research to graduate residency. So you'll be able to do research regardless of your program. And the majority of the programs now also have like pathways. You'll find out more next year when you're doing it. And you can even do research pathways and get special grants and all that stuff during residency. So if you're really into research, certain programs obviously are going to have more options available, but every program has research for you to do.
From an IR standpoint, so two things. I think just radiology in general, Dr. Sheff at MUSC is, just absolutely crushes papers and turns them out left and right, and you can get your name on one with very minimal work. I would look up what you have done research with, because they'll ask you you'll have your name on some crazy paper about dual energy CT or something like that, and then they'll ask you about it, and they'll expect you to kind of at least know something. So make sure you at least look it up and have a decent understanding, because you really can get a paper with him with kind of very minimal work. From an IR side, I would say I think they like to see at least some radiology research. I don't think it has to be IR specific. If you can swing something, the department here over the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, hasn't been quite as active in research as they have in the past. If you can find something, I think it will help set you apart from other people, but I don't think it's critical. I think just having maybe some diagnostic research is good enough. And then, like Logan said, just any research in general helps, just to make sure you don't have anything blank.
Yeah, for my IR application, I just had DR research from Dr. Sheff, and then I also was interested in vascular surgery, so I did some research with that, and they're always pumping out research. So if you go to Dr. Amada and he says, we don't have anything right now, maybe you can look in that direction.
Do they weight publications any higher than a conference presentation or something like that? Or do you have to have the research?
Every presentation and pretty much poster or anything is all considered a publication in ERAS. So when people say they have 10 publications, it's usually not actually real publications.
Yeah, and I had 3 projects that were technically in progress, they were accepted but weren't published yet, and you just write them down as in progress, and it still counts as one of your research publications, even if it's in progress. So, even if you feel you're late to the game, just get started on something, know the title of it, know where you're going to submit it, and then just write in progress, because then it's something that you can put on there.
And for anyone who's thinking about doing stuff with Dr. Sheff, he has an army of research assistants who will tell you in normal human words what the research project is. I just video chatted with one of them a couple weeks ago being what is this that I'm doing again? So if anyone's interested in going into that, he has other people that will help tell you what you're doing.
Yeah, I highly recommend working with him.
All righty. Any other last second questions? All righty. Well, thank you guys all so much for coming. Congrats to all the 4th years. That's awesome that everyone matched this year. Whenever you guys get your new emails, because I know MUSC discontinues these, if you wouldn't mind sending them to me, if anyone has any program-specific questions or anything like that, that would be fantastic. But yeah, congrats everyone. Thank you so much. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me for the radiology interest group or Emily for the IR interest group, and we can put you in contact with whoever if there's any other questions that you want to ask that maybe couldn't be reported. All right.